Ahoy there, today on the Red Sea, what is your worst work duck-up stories? Worked as a student in a bank agency. I was not 18 yet, so I was not allowed to be at the front desk. Some insurance issues. Basically I was doing paperwork in the back. Once, a customer wanted to enter, but one cannot just walk into a bank. You have to ring a bell and have an employee open the door for you by pressing a button under the front desk. Long story short, he rang. All employees were busy, so I went to press the button. I check under the desk. Malarkey. 3 buttons. The man was looking at me, looking pretty pissed by the waiting time. So I just press a random button. Turns out it was the method-ing alarm button. To sum it up, I accidentally pressed the alarm button while working in a bank. Back in high school, I had a job as a web designer at a small web shop servicing non-profit organizations. My bosses did not let on that I was as young as I was, and they handled all the face-to-face client meetings. My job basically entailed designing and preparing the website for our clients. One of our big clients was Christopher Reeve Paralysis Foundation. I sliced up the site and put in filler text, knowing full well that only people coming from our internal light would be able to see the development. I should mention that my company was small, close-knit and had a great, albeit vulgar, sense of humor. Rather than going the standard Laura Mipsum route, I instead filled in something along the lines of Herp Derp Him Christopher Reeve. I drive myself with a straw. Weaknesses include kryptonite and falling of horses. It got worse. But I'll let your imaginations fill in the blanks. There were about 4 paragraphs of filler text. I came into work after school one day and all 3 of my company's owners / my bosses were waiting for me. I thought they were pulling some prank, but they asked me to come into their office. At this point I knew something was definitely up. My boss, Chris and Dana saw the site. Me. What? Who? Him. CRPF. Chris and Dana Reeve. The director wanted to show them the progress. Apparently he did not check before he showed it to him in person. At this point I think my stomach hit the floor and kept going straight onto the Earth's core. My boss told me he'd let me know what the next steps were, but just to know that I was in deep malarkey. Anyway, I did not get fired, despite how adamant Dana Reeve was about the fact, and I had to write an apology to the Reeves. I found out later that Chris actually had a pretty solid sense of humor and thought it was funny. RIP, Mr. and Mrs. Reeve. To sum it up, I insulted Superman and lived to tell the story. I incorrectly labeled about 30 pairs of shoes as being $80 instead of $150. That was not a good day. You're the Robin Hood of foot apparel. For many years I worked in windows and doors. This gave me an opportunity to witness some massive duck-ups. Some were made by contractors. Some were made by manufacturers. Some by my mill and indeed some by me. I had spent years developing an excellent reputation for working on high-end homes. I worked with the architects on the front end, the clients and the contractors on the back end. It was a sweet deal for a guy in his late 20s. The money was good and I was turning away clients. So it was a real boon for me to land a gig in Seattle working with some great clients on some amazing homes. Being from the Bay Area, I reluctantly agreed to move to Washington. These jobs were big and needed serious project management, so I needed to be on site a few times a week. Well, the primary residence I was working on was located in the Orca Islands and was a completely custom job. Custom paint, custom wood, custom millwork, custom glass, custom hardware. The total job cost was $750,000 plus, and I was acting as an independent contractor supplying the material. We spent 9 months planning every detail, generating a construction document of 500 plus pages. We spent 2 whole days before ordering the product going over the specs line by line. I had the client and the contractor sign off on every line item. Finally I got a deposit on the material and initiated the order. The whole order took 6 months to receive. Once everything was in and the contractor was ready, I made plans for the delivery. It was not an easy delivery, so I brought in a driver I knew from my work in Big Sur. It was muddy mess getting the material to the job site and took 3 trips over 5 days to fill the unfinished garage with all of the windows. We met with the contractor and inspected the goods. Everything was fine. He signed off and all I needed to do was go home. Wait for the final check. The part of the payment that had my profit in it. I stopped and had a beer with my driver friend and headed back down to the ferry dock to take the ride over to my house on Bainbridge when my phone rang. It was the interior designer. "These are not the right color," he said. All the blood in my body drained. I quickly grabbed my briefcase and started to flip through the work order. Every ducking page of the 500 pages of order said the color that was delivered. I insisted. I have got the contract signed by the client and the contractor. It's the color that was ordered. This color will not do. I have ordered siding, trim. Everything is coming in for the color we changed it to. I hesitated and asked to let me review everything and get back to them. I got back to my office and gathered all my paperwork, and right there, dated on the orders file folder, change color to blah, blah, blah. I ate the windows. I ate the temporary windows I supplied them to keep the job on track. I ate chargebacks from the contractor. I lost 2 upcoming jobs. I ate the cost of sending a crew out and replacing the windows with the correct ones. I ate everything and had to order the windows again. I had moved my family up to Seattle for this job. I got a house. I bought a new car, etc. I was all in on this job. I went out of business at the end of the job, returned to the Bay Area, and went back to college. I will never put myself in a position where a one-line duck up will duck anything up that bad. Damn. That felt good to write about. Right out of tech school, I got a job as a mechanic in a small chain shop. Oftentimes, experienced techs would diagnose a problem then pass it along to me to do the hard labor. I think that is pretty typical. So, I get this car that needs an air conditioning evaporator replaced. For those that do not know, this is often found way up inside the dashboard and can be a considerable amount of work to extract. This particular one was a beast and fought me every step of the way. Hidden screws, unseen clips, tight spaces. I get it all back together and recharge the AX system. The car goes out working perfectly. As it turned out, the driver was taking a trip across country and I missed a crucial part of any evaporator install. Checking the drip valve. All of the accumulated water that would normally drip outside onto the ground was instead pouring inside her car. So, she gets back from her trip and the car was soaked. Over an inch of water under the carpet and seats. We had to strip it down to the metal and air dry everything for 2 days. I used to work at a car rental place. My job was to clean the cars, get them ready for customers, and do the inspection of the car before people took off with them. One day I was in the lot parking a truck that I had just cleaned and got out to head back into the office. It was not uncommon for people to come up to me with their rental papers and ask for the keys to their car, so as I was walking back, a couple of older sort of grimy looking guys walked up to me. The one guy said, "Hey, we're all done inside," and the lady said, "That truck is ours." I'm not even going to make excuses for why I did it, but without even asking a question I said, "Okay, great, here ya go," and handed him the keys. I thought it was weird at the time because when I handed the guy the keys, his friend said "duck" under his breath and looked pissed. Anyways, I walk back into the office without a care in the world and I see my boss. She asks if I saw those 2 guys out in the lot, and I said, "The guys who rented the truck?" "Yep." Then she looks at me with her jaw on the floor and says, "Ooh." She turns around immediately and calls the cops to tell them we just had a truck stolen from our lot. Weeks go by and eventually the truck turns up out in the middle of nowhere. The cops find needles and booze all over the inside and they returned it back to us. I had to go to the police station to pick the guy I gave the keys to out of a photo loop. To sum it up, I worked at a car rental company and basically assisted in a grand theft auto. I work at a pet store. I accidentally threw a snake away. I was cleaning the bedding and did not see him buried in his. I dumped it. 2-3 days later my department manager brought it back to me after finding it in the receiving garbage. Somehow I did not get in trouble. Snake was fine. I work in a theme park, and on this particular day, I was manning the control booth. I was sitting in the chair, which was a rolling office type chair, when I decided I wanted to stand. I hopped down and somehow managed to propel the chair into the wall with my ass. The chair slammed directly into a fire alarm, and the lever ended up getting depressed and pulled down by a chair. I stared at it in horror for a moment, but nothing happened until suddenly, BEEW, BEO, BEW. Yup, I set off a fire alarm with my ass. So when you have a fire alarm at a ride, you have to cycle all of the guests clear of the attraction, kick all of the guests out of the queue, and then evacuate all of the employees while you wait for the fire department to come and give you the okay to resume normal operation. Once we had gotten the venue fully evacuated, I was freaking out. I figured I was in huge trouble, what with inconveniencing several hundred guests and wasting the fire department's time and all. I came clean to my supervisor immediately. I was the only person in the control booth. It would be obvious that I had done something, so better let her know of my clumsiness before she thought I had a more sinister agenda. To my great surprise, she started laughing hysterically and told me not to worry about it. The ride ended up being closed for like an hour and a half, and during that time, I had at least 7 or 8 managers and supervisors from around the park come and make fun of me. I think the best part of the whole situation, though, was that after the incident, my supervisor and I decided there should be a cover over that fire alarm. So we gave a call to the safety department. We never did get a cover, because apparently a room full of engineers and the man in charge of safety resort-wide spent hours trying to fling a chair at that goddamned fire alarm, and not one of them could recreate what I somehow managed to do in one try. With my ass. I still get malarkey for that one. And it happened nearly 2 years ago. Unfortunately, I was not working to witness this, but when we were in high school, a friend and I worked at a large grocery store. She was working a register, and bored. Her fingers found a button under the counter. She pressed it repeatedly, meaning the cops were called repeatedly, assuming a robbery in progress. I had worked at that store for a long time, and was never told about the panic button under register #2. I worked in a mailroom right out of college for a fairly large company. We oftentimes had overnight, next day AM packages that had to be there or apparently the world would explode. I was responsible for getting these to the drop boxes before pickup time, which means I had to take them with me when I left work and drop them off. Well, one Friday, had one of these urgent letters, left work and completely forgot about it. It sat in my car all weekend. Got to work the next Monday. The CFO and several upper management were literally freaking out cause the letter didn't arrive. Got yelled at, etc. It apparently was a $500,000 check that this company was waiting for, or they were going to take some kind of legal action or something. It turned out fine, but I wanted to die at the time. Been there. I used to work at Chuck E. Cheese and was taking a pizza from the kitchen to the customer. At the time, it was extremely busy and there were little devils running everywhere, and this lady was at the far end, so I had to zigzag through the games to get to her. So after successfully maneuvering through a bunch of games and small children with 2 pizzas on my hands, I came within 10 feet of her table and thought I was home free. Well, turns out there was a 2-year-old kid crawling right in front of me. I tripped on the kid. The pizzas went flying and hit another kid, and both of the kids were crying because I stepped on one and nailed the other with pizza. And before you think this cannot get any worse, I then had to deal with the parents. That part alone still makes me shudder to this day. After about 45 minutes of yelling at me, they pressure my manager to fire me. My manager's a cool guy, so he said no, but he pulled me aside and told me he would have to pretend to go bat malarkey crazy on me to make the parents happy. He did, and it was the finest acting I have ever seen a non-actor pull off. It even scared me for a minute. I continued working in that hellhole for another year before I left for college. I used to run charges on credit cards as part of my job at a bike parts vendor. One day I mistakenly charged a bike shop over $1,000. It made the owner of the shop go over their credit limit and get a bunch of fees. I was fired soon after. The only job I was ever fired from. I later moved to the town where that very same bike shop resides. I spoke with the owner and mentioned that I had worked for the vendor long in the past. She told me in detail about the time that her card was charged by accident. I feigned ignorance. I was a stage manager at a 3,000-seat hall in downstate New York and was doing a performance of Julio Iglesias. Due to a snowstorm that day, I predicted a cancellation, so myself and about 5 other stagehands hit the hotel lobby bar for about 3 hours prior to doors. The radio DJs who were supposed to introduce him did not arrive on time. Even with the snow, the house was sold out and packed. I walked out on stage and stumbled over a cable and almost fell from the deck recovering. I walked up to the mic with spotlights on me all the way and proceeded to blank on his name and managed Julio and Gracious and ambled off the stage. Narrowly escaped unemployment. I used to work at a radio station that had the rights to broadcast NASCAR. Working the races was probably the most boring 4 hours of my life as it required listening for the lead into commercial breaks, switching the feed to our local commercials for a couple of minutes, and then switching it back to the race. I would usually watch TV or browse the internet throughout the entire race. At one point I switched to commercials and completely forgot to switch the race back on. So after a few minutes of commercials, the station went completely silent and stayed that way for about 20 minutes until I realized it was way too quiet in the studio. A minute or two of dead air was enough to get us in trouble. 20 minutes should have gotten me fired. But it was NASCAR so nobody noticed. Edit. Him going to shamelessly hijack my own post because I have a better story. I always think first about my NASCAR story because I like to think it's funny and a bit more harmless than my other story. I was working as a janitor in a hospital, if anyone's wondering. No, it isn't not quite like Scrubs portrays it, and I was always looking for ways to make my day more enjoyable. This often led me to play pranks on my fellow coworkers. Occasionally the pharmacy would get shipments on dry ice and I would get to play around with it once they received the medicine. I thought it would be a fun idea to put it in the mop bucket of my friend who was working on a patient floor. I would call her about 5 minutes later and it would be the perfect prank. Well, I did call her 5 minutes later and she answered in a panic. She told me she was having a chemical reaction in her mop water and she alerted the head nurse and the on-call hospital manager so they could start preparing to evacuate the floor. I quickly explained the whole situation and the next day I had a talk with my boss. It turns out that, even though most of the staff involved thought it was severely inappropriate, they also found it really funny. Once all the panic was over with, and my boss even complimented me on my creativity, even though I probably should have just been fired. Unfortunately it is the end of the video, but do not worry, there are many more coming. Like and subscribe for more videos from the Red Sea. Thanks for watching.